We're breaking down walls, tearing apart the lies. Together we'll stand, watch the whole world rise. Fate transcends boundaries, uniting every heart. In this movement of love, we're all taking part.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Vision Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel. So today we're doing something a little different. This is going to be part one of a two-part series that I'm doing, and it's just a story about me. It's letting you know who I am. I'm sharing the brokenness, the burden, the roots of why this podcast even exists. In the next episode, I'll talk about the mission behind the vision, the call to rebuild, and the people that it's made for. But for this one, it's just going to be diving into my story, kind of letting you know who I am. You know, we're 17 episodes deep, and I haven't done that yet. So I felt like you guys needed to know and, deserve to know who you're listening to. So thanks for, tuning in, and I'm just excited to dive into it. But before I get started, I do want to thank my sponsor, Men of Valor, for sponsoring this episode. You guys have walked alongside me in so many ways, and I'm just grateful for you. Make sure you check them out at movministry.com. So yeah, this episode is different. It's not a topic. It's not a trend. It's the foundation of me, of the vision, because the vision didn't come from branding. It didn't come from ambition. It came from brokenness and addiction and prison. It came from trauma. It came from a bunk in a cell where I met Jesus. But it started long before that. I grew up in a broken home. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. There was chaos. Dad was an alcoholic, pastor in the limelight, but behind the scenes, he was abusive and unstable. And, there were moments that should have shaped me into safety, but they just didn't. And I don't remember when I first felt like something was missing. But I do remember always feeling that I had to earn space in people's lives, earn attention, earn a love. And I don't say this to smear anyone. My mom, she did the best she could, and this is nothing against her at all. And but my dad was, he was pretty bad. And he's actually the first person who introduced me to drugs when I was 8 years old, which is insane to me. And, that's hard to say even now, because no matter how old we are, there's still a part of us that wants our father to be a protector, not a doorway into destruction and addiction and shame, but that was my reality. And it didn't stop there. This is, pretty hard to say, but I was already unraveling as a kid, just from being submerged in this chaos and dysfunction. And then you add sexual abuse on top of that, and it left me with a silence that I didn't know how to break. I didn't even have the language to name what was happening. But silence isn't healing. Silence is really just a deeper kind of prison, I learned how to disappear, not just from others, but from myself. I learned how to feel nothing, because nothing felt safer than everything that I was feeling. What I told myself is just me daydreaming or thinking is what I convinced myself that I was doing. I was really just hiding. I wasn't healing. The whole time I was hardening. My heart was just solidifying, because the little boy that was supposed to have goodness and peace and love in his life, yeah, although there was there in some aspect, the hurt was just too big, and it was too big for what a little kid can handle. And so, yeah, after my dad introduced me to drugs, I mean, that's where addiction became a friend. I didn't know it yet. And it didn't manifest itself right away. 8 years old was the first time I smoked pot. And you might think, well, that's not a drug. But I mean, for an 8-year-old, that's a drug. I don't care who you are. And, eventually it led to partying with friends, just smoking pot. And then alcohol came into the picture. And, I realized that I could use all that to step into a place where I didn't have to think. I didn't have to remember. I didn't have to feel. I didn't have to, just deal with any of the things that were going on in my head that told me I wasn't good enough. Because when I drank and drugged, it didn't matter anymore. It was just all taken away. It was numbing. And it made life bearable. Until it was unbearable. And, because the thing that may save you for a moment, it will destroy you over time. And eventually I ended up in prison. And, prison wasn't the lowest point in my life either. But it was the place that God met me. He came and he visited me. I remember lying in my bunk in that pod, not just tired, but I was undone. All the masks were gone. All the control I thought I had was gone. And I broke. I had been reading a purpose-driven life that another inmate had given me. And like I said, my dad was a pastor in public and abusive and behind closed doors. But so I'd kind of had an idea of who Jesus was, of who God was in my life. But I also used my dad as an example of, like, if that's what a godly man is, I don't want to be anything like him. If that's who God turns people into, then I don't want anything to do with God. But I had that book and I started reading it with an open heart because I didn't have anything else to hold on to. I mean, like I said, I was broken. But I remember laying in that bunk and I pulled the covers up over my head because I'm in a pod with, 75, 80 guys, and it's an open bay pod. So if you've ever been to jail, you know what that looks like. If not, it's just a huge room with bunk beds made out of steel. And so everybody was around, and the last thing you really want to be doing in prison is crying. So I just covered myself up in my bunk, and I cried. I mean, I wept, like deep, deep sorrow, deep tears. Not to be dramatic, but I just couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't asking God for anything fancy in that moment. I didn't know the right prayer. All I knew was that I could not go on like this anymore. And that's when it happened. Not a dream, not a hallucination. It was something a lot deeper and a lot more meaningful. It was like my whole life played out before my eyes. You hear people say that my life flashed before my eyes when they're, in trouble or they, get hurt or something like that. That's exactly what it was. It was like somebody flipped a switch and played two movies in my brain at the same time. It was pretty wild. Every dark moment selfish decision. Every time that I hurt someone, every time that I'd been hurt, it was just playing out. And I felt every ounce of pain and sorrow that I had experienced in my 28, 29 years of life at that time. But on the other hand, there was moments of kindness. There was moments of joy and peace. God showed me the birth of my first son and the feeling that I had, just ecstatic over this new life that was brought into the world. And I felt him in my spirit after that. It wasn't an audible voice, not this time. There's one I'll tell you about later, but this time, no, it was just resonating in my spirit, in my body, in my mind. This one question, it says, do you want the light or do you want darkness? And I remember just laying there because the vision stopped, whatever that was. It stopped, and I was just left with that question. Nothing else mattered. The sounds around the bunk just were gone. It was literally me in a blanket alone, surrounded by people, but I was by myself in that moment. Well, I say by myself, but I think it was just me and God. And I said, Lord, I said, Jesus, if this is what you're offering, if I can either go down this path of darkness and hate and betrayal and hurt and pain, or if I can live life full of these moments of goodness and joy and gladness and peace and potential, I was like, I want that. Jesus, I want that light. And it was that simple, that holy, that devastating to my reality, to my identity, because he wasn't forcing me to change. He was inviting me to choose. I guess you could say it was a literal crossroads, And in that moment, I did choose. I said yes to him, and I said yes to the light, and I said yes to the healing, and I said yes to becoming the man that I was always meant to be. Even though I didn't really understand what that meant at the time. Yeah, and that was just the beginning of the journey, honestly, because I had another 7 to 9 months or so that I was still locked up. And it was an interesting journey because I didn't just wake up and I'm a Christian, I woke up and I said, what now, God? Like, yeah, we had that moment, but what now? I'm still in this prison cell. I'm still surrounded by, people screaming and fighting and hate. And what do I do? And he didn't answer. Honestly, he just didn't say anything. But I kept seeking because I knew that moment was real. Fast forward a little bit, I had kind of dove into that search a little too deep, I guess. Maybe not for some, but for some, they would say it was too deep because I'd gotten into searching through all of religion, not just in Christianity, not just the Bible. Yeah, I started reading the Bible. Yeah, I started going to church services, but I was also interested in learning about why Christianity was the answer I needed, not just accepting it as the one that was true. And I remember after reading this Islamic poet named Rumi and just experiencing the power and the understanding that they had in relationship with God, I was still left with questions, because I had kind of attained this love inside my spirit that I knew was real. But I got left with the question of, Jesus, are you the truth? Is this the right way? And I remember I was laying in my bunk, and this is a whole different prison now. And I sat up in the middle of the night. I wasn't asleep yet. It was dark. There was no noise. It was 2 men's cells at this point. The door's shut, lights are off. And I heard an audible voice this time. And it said, "You'll always be lost unless you know." And that just threw me for a loop, because I'm like, all right, God, where's the roadmap here? That's not telling me anything. But I knew in that moment that it meant for me that I would always be lost unless I knew that the decision I made was the right one. And so that's when I went and got baptized. That's when I really fully committed myself to Jesus. Thankful for the other religions and their insight, but rooted in something that I knew within my spirit was true. And after I left, I came home. I was different. I was grateful. I felt alive, but there was still unfinished. I thought I was free. I thought that because I wasn't behind bars anymore, that I was walking in freedom. I hadn't yet learned what true freedom really looks like. And for a while, I did well. I was working, serving, trying to walk the right path, but I was still hiding. I was still holding parts of me back that I didn't want anyone to see. Still unsure if I could really fully be me and fully accepted. And eventually, I fell back into addiction. It wasn't rebellion. It was fear. Fear that I'd never measure up. Fear that I wouldn't be accepted. Fear that I'd one mistake away from being disqualified, and fear of that the version of me who met Jesus in that bunk really just didn't deserve to live in that light that he showed me. That relapse wrecked me, because I realized that leaving prison doesn't mean you're living in freedom. You can be out of a cell and still be trapped and be enslaved to something. You can be walking around free and still be wearing chains that no one else sees. But thankfully, God wasn't done with me. My sobriety date is March 15th, 2020. Just hit 5 years. And I say that not to brag or with pride, but with gratitude, because I didn't climb out of that pit alone. There were people, men and women, who saw past the mask that I had put on, who reminded me of who I was when I forgot. Who spoke life over me when I wanted to disappear. Who didn't let my failure have the final word. And I'll never forget that. You know who you are, and I'm grateful for you. I thank you, my wife. You were there. Kevin, you were there. The others, you know who you are. Because, and it's not that, the beautiful thing about it is they didn't come to me preaching and telling me to stop sinning or to trust God more, or pray more, or anything. No, all they did is they came and they sat with me in my wreckage. And they said, "You're not done yet. God's not done yet. This isn't the end." And that's when the healing began. That relapse didn't end the story. I'm still here because of it. And it became the soil for something much deeper. What followed were 4 of the most formative and complicated and sacred and wonderful years of my life. God gave me a family. Not just the idea of one, but the weight and the wonder of it. I became a husband. I became, a father to two more beautiful children. And there's no amount of words that I can say that expresses the gratitude that I have for those years. And, but with them, with everything, there comes pressure. With joy, there comes pressure. With provision, there comes uncertainty. Money came and went. Opportunity came and went. And my pride, that came and went too. Some days it felt like I was walking in purpose, and some days it felt like I was pretending again. I was even called into ministry during that stretch, and not because I had figured it all out or had it all together, but because I finally stopped pretending I did. And yet even in the middle of that calling, I still wrestled with identity. I still wondered if that version of me that God called was enough. And I finally realized, like, God, am I doing this because it's what you want me to do, or am I just performing again? Am I just putting on another mask of trying to be accepted, trying to heal the wounds from that little boy who was abused so many years ago? But I'll tell you, the tension of those years of being in that space really taught me this, that it is possible to be called and still be healing, to be a provider and still be processing, and to love your family deeply and still be learning how to love yourself the way God does. Those years mattered because they held both the fruit of what I was doing in my life and what God was doing in my life, but they also held the fire. It was just last year that I broke again, though, not because I'd failed, but because I saw something. I saw how many others were quietly breaking too. New believers showing up excited and walking out exhausted. People who loved Jesus but thought they were too messy to belong. People pretending because they didn't think they were allowed to be real. And I couldn't take it anymore. I thought about every man I'd met in prison, every person I'd seen come to the faith and then slowly disappear from the church. Not because they stopped believing, but because the pressure crushed them. And I thought to myself, if I don't speak up, who will? And that's when the vision was born. Not as a podcast, but as a burden. Like Nehemiah walking through the ruins of Jerusalem, seeing what others had learned to live with and saying, this isn't home. This isn't good enough. Exile isn't where I was meant to stay. I looked around and I saw a generation of believers in spiritual rubble, calling the exile normal and calling performance faith. So I said, no more. This podcast isn't a show. It's a table. It's a place to be honest, to be known, to come out of hiding. For the ones that feel too honest for church or too late to matter or too wounded to lead. You're not too anything. You're who Jesus came for. In the next episode, I'm going to show you where we're going. Today, I showed you where I came from. A little bit of it. It's kind of hard to fit 29 years into 30 minutes, but this next episode is going to be where we're going, because the vision isn't just my story. It's a mission. It's a movement. It's a home for those who are done pretending and are ready to rebuild. You don't have to wear the mask anymore. You're not too far gone. You're not behind. You are who you're supposed to be. And I'm here to help you find out who that is. I'll see you in part 2.
We're breaking down walls.